Started back up officially. I'd like to welcome you to our Learning Linux Workshop number 2, a workshop sponsored by APCUG. One of the benefits of membership into your group. We're here today with Orv Beach and myself. Sharon was not able to be here today, so he will join us next time. I kind of will also make mention that some of you may feel after the presentation's over that we kind of skipped over. We probably should have done what we're doing in number 3 today, and then today next week after Thanksgiving. But with Sharon not being able to be here, and that's his thing doing, we are going to flip that around. So by the end of the next time, everything will be all back in sync again. I can't see. Want to also remind you that we've got one more workshop for home automation in the second Wednesday of December. And the next 2 Linux workshops will sandwich bill the first week of December on a Wednesday at noon and the third week of Wednesday at noon. My name's John Kennedy. I'm an APCUG advisor, and I'm also APCG Zoom host, and I'm a co-presenter for this. So we're going to get started today, and I'm going to do a little presentation, and then Orv is going to do the big one today. It just killed that. Love computers. Today we're going to be talking about where to get your Linux distro. Last week we gave you a pretty good review of what Linux is, and today we're going to begin by talking about how to get your Linux distro. So where do you go to get a Linux distro? Do you go to the store? Probably not. You're not going to really find Linux on the shelves like you might find, or we did find Windows. Businesses want income. They sell things and they get a profit. Linux is free. There's no profit there. Nobody's going to pay them. If nobody pays them, they're not going to make any money. So most big stores do not have Linux for sale in them. How about magazines? Well, what is a magazine? Oh yeah, we still do have some magazines around. But you probably won't find very many Linux magazines in regular stores. I'm talking about convenience stores, grocery stores, because again, that's something that is for the business people profit. If only a handful or a small number of people are going to buy something, they don't really want to stock it. So you probably wouldn't find it there, unless you went to a full-size, bookstore that has books and tons of magazines, and there you'll probably find some Linux magazines. And some of these magazines include discs with them that might have a distribution or a distro that we call it for short. However, they could be specific to that magazine. I used to have a subscription to a magazine called Ubuntu, and it came out quarterly, and every so often they would send a disc with an Ubuntu distribution on it. And so I could just have one of those come to me. You might find a general Linux disk that magazine that might provide a number of different disks throughout the time. But again, that's a little bit difficult. A better place is from your friend. If you have a friend that runs Linux, or from your computer club that has a Linux SIG maybe, you could have somebody with a library of distros. I have a big zip folder that are for CDs, and I probably have maybe 40 some different CDs, all variations of Linux distros and such. And when we're at meetings, you know, and somebody sees something and they say, hey, I might be interested in doing that, I just whip out the disk, give it to them, and said, here, take it home. I'll go make me another one, because the CDs are so cheap and the DVDs. So we can spread them around that way. Sometimes I know of Linux groups that have like a cookie walk, and everybody brings in a bunch of Linux disks and trade them around. You could also have maybe a loaner laptop. In my computer club, my Linux group, we have 3 or 4 old laptops that were brought in for refurbishing or recycling mostly, because Windows would no longer work on it. So we grab those up and then we install Linux, and then we have laptops that we can give people to take home to try out Linux and see what they think of it. Probably the best place that you're going to find Linux would be on the internet. Each distro that we talk about has its own website, and so you'll be able to go and get what you need from them. Some websites contain multiple versions, and this is like cars. So we'll go back to my whole story about Linux is like cars. I can remember when I was very young that in our town we had a car dealer, and all he sold was Chevys. And we had another car dealer that all he sold was the regular mainstream Ford cars and trucks. But over time, dealers said, you know, I need to branch out. And so sometimes in the GM area, you would have somebody that would be selling, let's say, Chevys and Oldsmobiles, or maybe Oldsmobiles and Cadillacs. So they would do a couple. Now we have mega malls, and we have one dealer in Columbus, which is 30, 40 miles from me, and he probably, not only does he have multiple versions of a given manufacturer, but on his big mega lot, he probably sells 6, 7 different companies of cars. And so some websites will just have a single Linux version. Some might have multiple. As an example, you'll hear about a Linux called Ubuntu. And Ubuntu has a number of variations, just like General Motors had variations of their cars. But each of their versions is on a separate website. So you would have to go to each of those. A different Linux is called Linux Mint. And if you go to their website, they have 4 different versions, and you can access all 4 from that one website. And at these websites, you would find links to download what you'll hear about today is an ISO. We're used to create live media and to install Linux. But I advise you not to do random searching trying to find something. You hear about a Linux, so you do a kind of a search for it. You just have to be careful, as we all know on the Linux, because there are fake sites out there, and because they know people are downloading these things because they're free, they're not paying for them, there are fake sites that have infected files because they want nothing better than for you to mess up your computer because of that. So I'm going to recommend for beginners and those people who are just getting into Linux, a website called distrowatch.com. And we're going to take a look at that and find out, you know, what is so really good about it. And so we're going to stop and go live. And this is distrowatch.com. The reasons I recommend this is a safe site. It's an all-in-one site, and there's more information than you really want to know at this place. You can see right here in the middle, they will always have the up-to-the-minute news about different distros. And for example, this one's talking about a new release of a distro. This also, Distro Watch has a weekly newsletter. And you can read on the newsletter a whole bunch of information, reviews, surveys, questions and answers. It's really pretty good. You can also, if you look on the left-hand side, you would see that there's talking about the latest distributions. So they keep everybody informed on all the new ones. It's sort of like what we used to do back in the old days when the cars came out. They all came out at the same time in the fall for the next year. Now we have cars that come out whenever the manufacturer wants the new car to come out. Well, Linux does the same thing. They have some that come out on a schedule and some that come out all the time. So they let you know on the side what they have. The other thing that this website has on the right-hand side is that they have a list of distros and links to their home page. Now I'm going to do a zoom in here, because over here on the right hand side what I want you to see is that we have a ranking. Now what I want everybody to know that this is not a listing of which distro is the most popular. Some people think that that's what it is, but it's not what's the most popular. It's the ones that are the most investigated. And so this is a ranking. Right now, MX Linux is a newer version and it's getting a lot of attention. So lots of people are visiting that. But what we have here is a whole list of all of these different Linuxes. And as I scroll down, you can see that we go clear down to 100. There are a minimum today of 100 versions of Linux out there, and there are more. And with Distro Watch, they have a list that goes beyond 100. They have a list of people who are in the waiting rooms, waiting to become added to the list. So you can come to this site and find out what are the most trendy ones. Now, I would have to probably say that Ubuntu or Ubuntu is probably the most widely used version of Linux. We'll discuss that stuff more in future presentations. But the reason that something like Mint is ranked higher, if you remember, Ubuntu and all of its different family members are all on separate pages. Mint is all on one page. They have 4 different versions. So everybody that's looking for any version of Mint comes to this one website. So they get more what we call hits than Ubuntu does, because this is just for one of 10 different versions of Ubuntu. Now, for the new people to see what we get, we're just going to pick, because MX Linux happens to be what I run. So when we go to the MX page, or any of these pages, what you'll get is some information about each version. You will see that you can find out what type of operating system this is, and of course this is Linux. It'll tell you what is it based on, where does it come from, and we talked about recipes before. and somebody takes one and they make it up, and then somebody says, well, that one was good, but I can make it better. So you'll be able to find out whether this is an original version of a distro or something based on somebody else's and improved it. So you can see this one was based on Debian and Antic X. You'll find out for sure, because a lot of people want to know what will it run on. You'll see that this will run on both 32-bit and 64-bit. It'll tell you about a desktop version. We will be talking about all of that next time. And it'll talk about that whether it's an active distribution or an inactive, because we have some distros that are out there. There's like books on the shelf in the library. They're old copies, but they still run. It'll give you a little description of it. In the bottom part, which is the part that you would want to be concerned about, is that when you come to this section, you'll get a link to the home page for whatever distribution you're looking up. Here we also have a link to their user forum, which user forums are very big in Linux. There's some documentations for it. You can even see some screenshots that you can go to. This one happens to go to their home page with some screenshots, and Distro Watch has been collecting it. If there are any links to videos about this, they'll give you that. But now down here at the bottom, this is where we're concerned about. Here's the download mirrors. This is where you go to get that. And the reason I tell you to come here and do it is because you know that you will go to the safe, best spot to get it. And the other nice thing about Distro Watch is they will list all the reviews that are coming from themselves or from other magazines. And you can see that this is version 19, and there are 4 different reviews that you can get about them. And you can go back. Notice down at the bottom shows you where to buy. Most of them will be empty because Linux is free, so you don't need to be buying it. Now, I do want to say again, because I mentioned before, that there is one Linux that is a paid Linux, but it's not for Linux. It's called RHEL, Red Hat Enterprise Linux. The payment is for tech support, because businesses want somebody else helping out with the problems. So they're not paying for Linux, they're paying for tech support. Otherwise, Linux is free. You may have some distributions ask for donations. I had one distro I was checking on that it was free, but if I didn't want to make a donation, I had to wait 24 hours before they would send me the link to get that. So I chose to wait the 24 hours. So this is what you get when you come to Distro Watch, and why I recommend people come here. There's a lot more in here, but the biggest part is reviews and the actual links to all of these different Linux that you might try. And the big beauty of it is Linux is free, so you can try out as many of these as you want. Now, a number of 100 is very daunting as to, oh my goodness. But next month, Sharon is going to help you decide which Linux that you want to use. A lot of times people talk to their friends. What do your friends use? In my particular case, most of the people in our Linux SIG, not most, a number of them do the same Linux that is on our classroom computers. And there are others who've branched off to what they want and what they enjoy. So that's the pretty much where you go to get them. You can, like I said, this will take you to their homepage, but I really caution people, unless you exactly know, that you can just be typing in what you want to search for, and there's all sorts of creeps out there, and they will want you to come to their website, and they'll send you a download that is just, you know, virus infected and whatever. So I'm going to stop here. because that's my last slide sheet. Oh, nope, I'm sorry. I got to turn the page. I got one more. So if we go back to the Linux one, and I got to show you this. I forgot, sorry. And we go to the download site for MX Linux. What you'll do is this will be the place that you get what you want. We're going to talk more about that. It'll tell you which one's the current one. This one has two basic different versions of MX, but it also lets you know that the one version can work on 32-bit and 64-bit. Then it will tell you, here's how you can get it. There are 3 different ways that you can download directly from their site, go to a web server that's closer to you maybe. That's what we call with mirrors. Or you can use a service called a torrent, and we'll maybe talk about that more later. You'll also have general information about how to download, how to install, but that's Orv's big thing today. This one also has a video that goes with it, but basically this would be the same. You go to Distro Watch, you go to the distribution you're interested in, you go to their download page, and then you get it. And you get your ISO, and then you'll find out what to do with it later. So now I can stop that sharing and check with Bill or Judy and see if we have any questions before Orv takes over.
John, I have none.
Okay. I hope to be making it just pretty simple. That was just kind of the foundation.
John?
Yeah.
That was crystal clear. I have no questions.
Star for me.
And you truly speak a different language from a Windows person. That's what I kept thinking about as you were talking.
Well, thank you. All right. Well, the big part is with Orv, so we're going to turn things over to Orv. I'm going to mute myself and ask Orv to take over and do whatever he's going to do.
You hear me, John?
Yes.
Okay. Just a couple quick comments. John did a great job of covering distros, and there are guys whose main hobby with Linux is what they call distro hopping. They'll try one out for a few months, and then they'll try another one for a few months, and they'll grumble a little bit about it. They're never satisfied. I've been using Linux since, well, long time. And I think I've used 3 different distributions during that time. I'm using multiple now, but there's a reason for that. And one more comment, John had talked last workshop about them being like cars, and that's really a very apt simile when you come to Linux distributions, because like cars, they're 95% similar. They all have 4 wheels mostly. They all have a steering wheel, a transmission, drivetrain. The details are on the fit and finish and the final intention. Let me share my screen. Let's see if I can do this. You see that, John?
Had to find my mic. Looks good.
All right, thanks.
Yeah.
So anyway, there are lots of ways to approach running Linux if you want to get your feet wet, and we'll discuss a number of them. Then we'll do a demo installation. And John, because the installation takes 15 minutes or so to do, we might want to take a few questions while it runs. That's up to you. So anyway, like I said, you have lots of options. One of them is you boot Linux from a USB drive or a DVD. Either one works. Somebody had a question about installing a bootable Linux on a USB drive, and yes, it's Rufus. The Ubuntu site has detailed instructions. Being a Linux guy, if I want to load a bootable ISO on a USB, I just do command line. I will shamelessly admit that I'm not a Windows guru, so my first inclination is to try it in Linux. The good points about booting from an external drive, you can try it before you install it. If you don't like this distro, slap another ISO on your USB and try that. Good point is there, you only do one machine. You can boot on your normal Windows machine, and whatever's on the drive, external drive, takes over the hardware. The downsides, you really can't use it for production. Obviously, you can't write to a DVD, and USB drives aren't persistent. That is, you can't save data. You can't do any real work on a machine booted like this. I've read there are ways to make USB drives persistent so you can take your work with you, but they take a little bit of command line hoop jumping, I guess. So that's one option. The other option is it's not a hard drive and it's not an SSD, so it running a Linux from an external drive, a USB, either thumb drive or through a DVD, can be leisurely. So you probably wouldn't want to use it for regular production work. The other options for running Linux is you throw it on its own machine. The good things about this, you don't have to mess with your other production computers. You can leave them alone. Linux is not hardware intensive. Pretty much any old thing, as long as you have enough RAM and enough disk space. The downsides, now you've got two computers, more desk space, more power, etc. And a little comment here, a little side comment. If you aren't already running solid state drives on all of your computers, run don't walk to your computer, get on Amazon and order a cheap SSD. It can give any machine, especially older machines, a new lease on life. Boots faster, loads faster, and generally can extend the lifetime of older hardware. And one more comment, while Linux is not compute intensive, that doesn't say anything about the apps you want to run on there. Obviously, on an older, formerly Windows 7 machine, vintage, you would not want to do video editing or high-res graphics editing or anything like that. So keep that in mind when you're picking older hardware to run Linux on. You got to think of your workload. Here's another option. You can dual boot. You can start either Windows or Linux at boot time. Good thing about this is you only need that one machine. The downside, you need to make space on your C drive for the Linux installation. Generally, a modern computer has plenty of space, unless you're into collecting movies or something, but it's only need, I don't know, say 50 gigabytes. Only 50 gigabytes. I can't imagine I'm saying that, to install a Linux. And what you have to do is go into your device manager in Windows and tell it to shrink the C drive down and make it unused space. You used to have to jump through hoops with that, but it's moderately straightforward now and well documented. Just Google it. The downside is, if you want to use the other operating system, you need to reboot. Most of them have a boot menu that looks very similar to this, and it'll pause either indefinitely or a few seconds. And if you don't do anything, it will boot the first one on the menu. If that's not what you want, you just arrow down and pick what you want. This laptop I'm running on here is dual boot Windows and Linux, and it has something very similar. Another option is to run what they call a virtual machine. There is software you can install on any operating system that will allow it to host any other operating system, and that guest operating system thinks it's on its own hardware. So it's pretty handy. The good points, again, you only need one machine. Most of them are now configured to where you can share files and cut and paste between operating systems. If you're working on something in, say, Microsoft Word on Windows 10, you can copy something and paste it into, if you're running Kubuntu, paste it into Kate, the text editor. You can use either VirtualBox or VMware, and I have some more to say about that in a little bit. The downside is, as yet another program, you have to install, configure, and periodically upgrade. Not a huge deal, but you have to be aware of staying current. And if you're going to run two simultaneous OSs, you may run shy on RAM, depending on how much you have. If you're only going to periodically boot a virtual machine and just use it for a little bit, you might be able to get by with what you've got. Or don't use the other operating system during that time. You know, shut down all the running applications. And typically, you'll need more screen space, and this works out really well if you have a second screen. You drag the virtual machine display, its desktop environment, over to the second machine, and it's like you have, or second screen, and it's like you have two computers with one common keyboard and mouse. Very handy. Like I said, I'm mostly a Linux guy, and I've used VirtualBox, for example, for quite a few years. Very comfortable with it. But it turns out most of my experience was installing a Windows 10 or a Windows VM on a Linux guest or host machine. It turns out installing Linux on VirtualBox running on Windows is a little different. On Windows, you kind of have to jump through hoops to install from a USB drive, and a DVD is very slow. John pointed out to me that you can install it from an on-disk ISO image, which I had never known, because installation from a USB drive is perfectly usable in Linux. So you learn something every day. And so here's a screenshot of VirtualBox. I imagine most of you have at least heard of it, if not using it. So where do you go to get VirtualBox? This is the one I'm going to use. VMware is okay too. It's the VirtualBox downloads. And notice my great graphics. Under VirtualBox platform packages, you want the Windows host. And then there's an option down at the bottom, the extension pack. A bunch of useful packages in there, extensions. I think one of them is the one that allows you to copy and paste between platforms, and also read files from the other OS. But wait, there's more. A year or so ago, maybe a little longer than that, Windows 10 brought out the Windows Subsystem for Linux. They're now on version 2. Their description is a compatibility layer for running Linux binary executables. In other words, it's a built-in VM host, similar to VMware or VirtualBox. The cool thing about it is, and this is documented, just Google how to install WSL on Windows. You have to start up PowerShell and copy paste 3 commands into PowerShell, and poof, you got WSL. Then you go to the Windows App Store and pick which Linux distro you want and download it, install it, and launch it. The bad news is the GUIs aren't yet available natively. What you get when you install it as a console, a terminal. That Linux VM that you've just installed and booted will run an RDP server or a VNC server, so you can launch the VNC client or RDP client on Windows and log in remotely to the virtual machine on your same box. It works. I've tried it. It's just a little bit clunky, but it works perfectly fine. Windows has promised they will have native GUI by the end of 2020, so we'll see. So once this comes out, this would be my recommended method for running Linux on Windows. You wouldn't need VirtualBox or VMware. This is what it looks like right now. And you can see this is my Windows 10, or I don't know, this is a screenshot from someplace. And you can see that it's running Ubuntu 20.04, which was this spring's release. And it's command line. It is absolutely, absolutely functional. So we'll do a demo now. Let me get rid of this stuff. John, can you see VirtualBox on my screen? I just want to confirm.
Yes, I can.
Okay, very good. This is VirtualBox. You have to configure the empty VM before you can install it. So click on New. I'm going to call this Linux, can't type, Linux demo. You'll notice when I type Linux, the version down here changed to Linux. And these are the versions of the kernel, the old 2.6, the 3.x series, and the 4.x6 series. So this would be a generic Linux installation for anything. I accidentally installed on this. I am installing Kubuntu, which is, as far as it's concerned, is Ubuntu, and it installed fine. But if you click down here, for instance, a very wide selection, I'm going to run Ubuntu 64-bit. And just a comment, most of the distribution maintainers are starting to abandon 32-bit support. There's very little use for it anymore. Some of the embedded Linux people are using, hang on, let me pause for a second. Forgot to mute the answering machine. Okay, so we got this set up, got a name. This machine folder is created when you install VirtualBox. You could change it, but really there's no need to. So go to Next. You want to give it, for the demo, 2 gigs of RAM is fine. Create a virtual hard disk now. And this is the one, generally the default VDI is fine. And there's 2 ways to do it. You can say, I want a fixed size, and it will create a 20 gig file where your virtual image goes, or it will dynamically allocate it. In other words, it's a virtual 20 gigs to the guest OS, and it will be grown on the physical Windows C disk as needed. This is fine here. And how big do we want it? I'm going to make it 20 gig, just because. Okay, not quite ready to start yet. There is another couple settings we want to do. I read a hint that said under the display, some of the installers will not run unless you give them 128 megs of video memory. I don't know why, but that's what they require, and so I'm doing it. Now, under storage, you can see that the fake SATA controller has our empty VDI virtual image, but there's nothing to boot from. So if you go over here and point it to the ISO you previously downloaded, and this is set to boot off of optical, in quotes, before the hard disk. So this is always the adventure. And by the way, this is pretty leisurely. I don't know why, but anyway, we'll start it up. And this is where we wait. John, you want to address any questions that might be outstanding?
Unless you go ahead and do the few steps right here.
All right. And you'll get this little screen here. You can go to view and do a scaled mode, and you can make it larger. So you notice it's saying Kubuntu, OEM install, test, there's a memory test in here, and you notice down here it's counting down. If you don't do anything, it will boot in 20 minutes, but I'll just hit enter and we'll go for it. And I'm gonna make it a little bit bigger. This is the part where nothing happens. You'd think it would be faster booting a virtual disk. Here it's checking everything, and I don't need to check it, so I'm going to give it the mouse focus, do a Control-C like it recommends, and as soon as it finishes the first disk, it'll go into the boot. There you go. Now, it's doing a disk check, which I halted, but all the distros, after you've downloaded the ISO, you can do an integrity check. They'll give you like an MD5 sum or something, which is a checksum on the ISO image, which is just one file. And you can run that if you want after downloading. I don't generally, because downloads are pretty reliable these days, but if you want to feel safe, you can run the MD5 sum. Just remember that running it on a 2.5 gigabyte file will take quite a number of minutes, but you only have to run it once. So I'm booting Kubuntu here, which happens to be the Ubuntu flavor with KDE Plasma on top of it, because I've used KDE even before it was called Plasma, since version 1.0, and I started running it because back then it was very Windows-like. It still is, you know, you got your start menu and your start button and a taskbar. But all of these UIs are highly configurable. You can have multiple taskbars, top and bottom if you want. And all of the stuff you would expect to be configurable and then some. And it knows about multiple screens too. At work, I had 3 screens and filled them all up with work boxes, you know, browsers and a lot of terminals and stuff like that. So nowadays I'm retired, and one computer has 1 screen, 2 has 2, and another one has 1. And I was talking about running different flavors. For years and years I ran Fedora. Then I started using Raspberry Pis, which run Raspbian, which is a flavor of Debian. So I thought, well, why not convert everything else over to it? Okay, so here's another one another point that's kind of annoying. This is the installer. You can either try or install it. I'm going to say try it because I'll show you what that will bring up. You could install it directly from here, but it's fun to give it a test drive first. I see those errors every time I boot up. They don't seem to impact anything. I think it can't write to a log someplace. My cats are bugging me, sorry. By the way, KDE Plasma is written with a lot of libraries and stuff by a company called Qt or Qt. And the Qt libraries are OS indifferent. In other words, if you really, really like the Kate text editor on Linux, you can install it on Windows. So it's still booting up, believe it or not. It's actually, I don't know why this part is so slow. This part is not normally slow when you're running it on Linux. That's That's my knock on Windows for today. And I'll manfully resist making any others. Yeah, it's still running. That is the launcher. That's the start menu. As soon as it comes up, I'm going to do one more thing before I get into the actual installation.
You might mention that this is what we call a live distro. It's running, but it's not installed.
That's right. And the only icon on the desktop is the option to install it, and we should see that in a minute, he said theoretically. You can see the taskbar defaults down here at the bottom. Some of the others default at the top. All of these icons are interchangeable, adjustable, and movable. What I am going to do while I'm waiting, the installer defaults to 800 by 600 on this little old laptop, which is only 1024 by 768 anyway. So I'm going to tell it to use 1024 by 768. And if we ever get the installer up here, let's see if it has it in here. No, it doesn't. Yeah, John, this worked perfectly 2 or 3 times prior to this demo.
Of course.
What I can do is reboot it. If it doesn't come up, I'll reboot it and just go straight to installation. The only thing this would show you is the default wallpaper and with an icon to install it. So let's do that. Restart the computer.
Mm-hmm.
Let's try that. I'm not going to take the installation medium out. That's what they expect you to do once the installation is complete. Oh, stop. Here. Let's start that again. Good thing we got lots of time. I'm going to make sure that it's still mounted. Ah, look at that. It took it out. That's why it wouldn't boot. Okay, one more time through the loop. We get to wait again. Okay, we'll try that again. And this is, again, where nothing happens.
Yeah. Well, I might mention while we're waiting for the next,
There we go. You can go ahead and talk, John.
Yeah. To let people know, because somebody said, do I have to understand, you know, all this about Virtualbox, which is a little bit, you know, confusing. And the answer is no. What we're doing for you is that we're going to go through and show you how to install a Linux, because we can't do that, you know, live on a Zoom, because you've got to be controlling the installation and Zoom can't work until it's over. So once we get to this next spot, this is what you would be doing on your computer to install Linux on a computer. So Virtualbox is mainly for people who would like to be able to test drive without making any changes to your computer. So when Orv gets to the part where it says install, that's what you are going to see, the actual installation of Linux, but we're just not doing it on a live computer because you wouldn't be able to see it.
Yeah, I thought about focusing a camera on the laptop and just running it live there, but I couldn't figure out a nice way to do that.
Yeah. The other thing is, do you want to explain that funny word that you said a little while ago, GUI, that we're not talking about cookies and pies? That what's a GUI?
Sure. Stands for Graphical User Interface. The other one is CLI, Command Line Interface. The GUI is the the mousy clicky thing you use most of the time. Command Line Interface is where you type commands in a window, like back in the really old, increasingly old DOS days. And I might mention that if the Linux command line is intimidating to you, just remember back in the DOS days, we had, I don't know, 150 commands maybe, but you used daily maybe a dozen, change directory, create a directory, remove a drive. On the Linux command line, you may have like 1,500 commands, but you use the same 12 every day, and some of them are even named the same way they were in DOS. So it's nice to get your feet wet. All right, let's try this. I have not tried the install Kubuntu, but we'll see what happens without going through the try Kubuntu. Okay, good. Okay, this is where it's really annoying. This is the application running, but it took me a while to figure this out. You have to move it over a little bit to be able to see the continue button. Really annoying. So anyway, yeah, we want the English. There's just a few questions to answer. Normal installation. For this, I'm going to uncheck this. In other words, this ISO was created a few months ago and it was frozen in time. They don't update it. Since then, various programs get updated. There could be several hundred updates. Most of them are small and inconsequential, but having to download them takes more time. Having said that, I noted that it still downloads a few files, so I'm not sure if that's broken or they don't consider what they're downloading updates, just part of the installation. If you have like NVIDIA cards or something, you might want to click this because there's the NVIDIA drivers, video drivers are proprietary. They're external to the Linux open source universe. As it says here, some are proprietary. Continuing on.
I'll hold off on another question because there's, just as I start, it'll come up with the next step that you have to do. So when we get to the long time, we'll talk.
Okay. Didn't take this long last night. So you might as well go ahead, John.
Oh, well, I popped the word out or the phrase out, and somebody was, because like Judy said, we speak Linux, even though it's not Linux. Oh, go ahead.
Okay. So if you were installing this not through Virtualbox and you were installing it on a computer, if you were going to install Linux on top of the existing OS, Windows 7 or whatever, you'd say use entire disk. The other two, the guided ones there, set up logical volume management, and the bottom one set up encrypted logical volume management. You don't need those on a laptop or anything you use at home. The top one's good. If you were going to dual boot and you had created a separate disk partition off of your C drive, you would go to the manual and tell it which of those, pointed at the newly created empty partition, and it would install there. If you get it wrong and you install it on top of your Windows partition, you're dead in the water. So, but for this one, the entire disk is referring to the entire VDI disk we created in Virtualbox. So what it's going to do, it's going to start formatting the disk as soon as I give it permission. And disk formats in Windows are NTFS, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. And there are different flavors of partition formats in Linux. The most common is ext4. So what it's going to do is it's going to walk me through the rest of the configuration while it's busily prepping the disks and starting to install software. You can see it down there. I did notice on my first installation, Virtualbox defaults to the virtual hardware clock being on UTC. So when I booted into the installer, the time was wrong. But that doesn't matter because here you can tell it which time zone you're in, and from then on the clock will be correct. Okay. It'll pick a username for you. That's not the one I normally use. And I'll put my usual password in there if I can type it right. And you notice down at the bottom, it's installing files. Okay, down here you have the option of when you boot up, log in automatically, or require a password. I wouldn't ever log in automatically, especially if you're going to use it in some sort of, call it production work or day-to-day work, because anybody could get into it. So when copying files gets to 100%, we're not done. It will do a bunch of configuration, download some other files, do some more installing, blah, blah, blah. But, you know, it's going to take about 10 minutes now, John. What you'll see now as it goes through installation is a Kubuntu slideshow. For the new user, it's useful to read them. It tells you something about the Kubuntu installation, some of the stuff that's on it. And I'll sit here and jabber away while it's installing. Any Linux installation will come with, like I mentioned in the last presentation, some number of default applications. Your Office suite, a couple of web browsers, they're on there. I don't use Contact. That's a personal information management suite. I don't use that. LibreOffice is the open source Office suite, very equivalent, mostly equivalent to Microsoft Office. They have a database called Base, which is good, but it's not compatible with whatever comes with Office. LibreOffice has its own native file formats, but they format to there's an organization called ISO, International Standards Organization, and they define standards for things, and file formats are defined in ISO, and OpenOffice, LibreOffice now defaults to keeping their files in this ISO format standard. You can tell it can load and save Windows file formats, Word and Excel and the like. As far as reading them, compatibility has gotten better and better over the years. It's probably 99.9% accurate. You just have to remember that, for instance, if you're importing a Word document, for example, that has fonts in it that your machine does not have, it's going to substitute the closest choice. So the document will look funny. And that's true whether you're running on Windows or Linux, and whether you're running LibreOffice or you're on a Windows machine that's got an older version of Word on it. So file compatibility is a little bit of an issue, but honestly, I like LibreOffice. It's solid, got better and better. It's cheap, like free, and I even use it on Windows. The other, Chrome is available, Firefox is available. I use a genealogy program called Gramps. I've used that since version 0.1. I think I have just went past 6,100 people in it. What else? I don't know. The spreadsheet is Calc. It's quite good. John, any other Linux apps you got to have on your machine?
Oh, probably so, but let everybody know that our fourth scheduled Linux workshop on the 16th or 18th of December is going to be totally focused on software. And so we'll have a chance to talk about all the different software that's out there, the open source software, the different kinds of software. I use a lot the same with you, but with Linux, there are so many different varieties of the same software that you use what you like the best, what looks best for you.
Well, that's true in the Windows world too. There's probably, a dozen icon editors, for example, or a dozen weather gadgets for your screen. You just pick the one you want. I've been in Linux like forever. When it first started coming out on the desktop, the choice of desktop type applications was slim. It was pretty grim. But that was many, many years ago. And nowadays, any large desktop application is typically available. Any large open source application, I should say, is typically available for Linux, Windows, Mac OS, iOS, Android. One of the ones that comes to mind is soft phones. The VoIP phone application. There are a lot of them, and they're available for every OS.
Yeah, and as a good example of that was our other workshop that we had on Bitwarden as a password manager. I use it on Linux. I use it on my Android phone. I know that Kenneth uses it on his Apple operating system, and it can be used on the Windows operating system. So, that's an example of what we call cross-platform that can work on anybody, no matter which one. And I'll mention that in the week after Thanksgiving, the first week in December, it's Wednesday, we're going to be focusing on not only which distribution do you might want to try out of those hundreds that are out there, but we will be focusing on all the different models, like in cars, of our desktop environments. And Orb is showing us one particular one with what's called KDE, and we're going to get a number of people who are going to take us on a little show and tell about different ones, and that's another way of trying to make the decision. With Windows, you have one choice, but with Linux, you have almost a dozen now, and each of us like the one that we're running, and so we'll share that with you too. How about this? Can you kind of give a layman's explanation as to what that ISO for Kubuntu and MX, because you did say it was an international standards organization, but the distribution ISO, how would you kind of explain what an ISO is for the operating system?
Sure. It actually got started back with the first CDs. There was no standard for packing files on a CD. And the ISO industry got involved and said, okay, this is the standard for how you put files, the file format layout on a CD, because back then you could put a lot more on a CD than on an operating system could even handle. So it had to know how to address that stuff. And as things got bigger, they adopted a DVD ISO, and the ISO image, ISO organization expanded into other standards, but we're talking about file formats here. Basically, the ISO file follows the ISO standard for the layout of stuff inside it. It's a single file, but inside the arrangement of the internals follows the ISO image, and the installer knows how to unpack that ISO image and sort it into different folders and the files within. How's that, John?
I think so. And the other explanation too would be that you can't take an ISO like this Kubuntu ISO and run it. It has to be converted with the installation process so that it can work. But if you tried to just run ISO, it would come up as, you know, it's not an exe file in Windows or a bin file in Linux that will run. It's just a way of taking all the parts that are involved and packaging it to be able to distribute it. That's a good word. And then, you know, open it up.
Yeah, it's kind of like a zip file, for example. There's lots of compressed files that contain files within, and you have to know the organization and structure internally. And that's what the standard is about. I don't know if you were watching the lower right hand, it said it installing Grub. Grub is the Grand Reunified Universal Bootloader. When your computer wakes up, it starts with the BIOS, and the BIOS says, okay, look on the first track of the first sector of the first track, and it'll tell you where to go. And in a Windows-only installation, that'll say, okay, go to the first stage of loading Windows, et cetera, et cetera. When you have two operating systems you can select from, what happens is the bootloader, whichever it is, there's lots of third-party bootloaders, will strip off that first drive and a couple of sectors, combine it with its own menu and lay it back down there. So what you get is that selection menu on boot. So that's what this one did. In this case, it doesn't see any Windows. So it just installed the Linux portion of it. Now on the laptop I'm actually running this demo on, which is dual boot, it does have that bootloader with selections for both Linux and Windows on it. So the package loader is installing some libraries. It says 92%. Who knows how much longer it'll take.
I think, you know, for your benefit too, to when we explain that how much faster this usually does in Windows, is that I think the slowdown process is partially due to being on Zoom with the camera running and the audio and the file sharing that you're doing. So that's put a little bit of a strain on the computer, because otherwise this would have been done by now.
Oh yeah, absolutely. The other issue is you're running it through Virtualbox, and Virtualbox has to take all of the Linux system calls that the installer is running and translate them into Windows calls, and that's quite a bit of overhead. If I was installing this on a fresh machine with a solid state drive, I guess it would be way under 10 minutes. Mm-hmm. It just slams it in there.
Yeah, and it's the same thing too. You know, when you run something off of a thumb drive or off of a CD, it's not exactly the same as running it right off your hard drive. It's a lot faster. Okay, and after we do this part, I think, Orv, are you going to talk about dual booting?
I can, but I can't show it.
Right, but we can talk, because somebody's wanting to be able, what are the steps to do dual booting, so that they can try out Windows at the same time. So we'll refer to that a little bit.
Okay. Honestly, folks, the easiest way to try this, other than the booting off a thumb drive, is take that old junker laptop you have laying around someplace, make sure it has enough RAM, buy a cheap solid state drive for it, and dedicate a machine to it. The installation will be a piece of cake, since it's on a blank disk, and you'll be up and running in 10 minutes. And the nice thing about Linux with a modern GUI, you don't have to be a Linux guru to be productive with it. There's enough stuff on there that you can be productive immediately. Your browser, it even knows how to get to, like for instance, my Linux box can get to the home file server, which is on the home network, and all the machines get to. I'll make a little comment about that. There's only two types of people. It's not quite as common as it used to be. Those who have had a hard disk crash, and those who are going to have a hard disk crash. I have all of my computers arranged to, the data is not shared on the computer. It's shared on the home file server, which is a Synology NAS. It wasn't cheap, but it's worth the price. It's I lost some files one time, and my wife seriously considered going out and getting a gun, even though she's against guns, and shooting me. Since then, I installed the Synology, which is redundant disk drives. At night, it backs up the changes to an external hard drive, USB hard drive. And quarterly, my daughter brings my a backup hard drive from her house 30 miles away, and I do an rsync to that, put all the new drives, new files on there, and take it back to her place far enough away to where an earthquake won't damage both houses. You may not have to worry about that, but there are tornadoes and hurricanes. So make sure you have multiple backups. And by the way, there are Linux distributions that are meant as home file servers. If you have an old desktop, put 2 SATA drives on it and download a Linux server distro and set up mirrored hard drives. Put them on your UPS, and it will act as a Windows server with no problem. And you just create a Z drive or something over there and put all your documents over there.
Hello? Hello?
Yeah.
Did
we have a question?
No, we didn't.
Okay.
Not yet.
Yeah, now you mentioned, John, this is about as fast as installing on an old hard disk.
Yeah. And our intent was that we were going to show you how fast and quick it is, but
a camera pointing at a fresh raw install on bare metal would have been much faster.
Yeah, and so those who were asking about it, this was the process that all you do is you have to go through your BIOS system to do your boot to a CD or a thumb drive. And just like in Windows, Windows, you have to be able to boot to the CD or thumb drive to install Windows. So it's the same thing. And you then go right through the same procedure of setting up your personal information and kick it in. Question on installing a CD drive on a laptop. How feasible is it for a person used to working on a desktop?
I'm not sure what the question was.
How feasible is it for a person who's used to working on a desktop to put an SD in a laptop?
It's pretty well. It's pretty straightforward. The solid state drives are physically the same size as the hard disk you're taking out. Ease of removing depends on the brand, but in most cases, you take a plastic cover off the bottom. The drive will be secured with a couple screws. Take those off, back the drive out of the connectors, plug the new one in and bolt it down. In some cases, especially with older laptops, that hard drive may be in a carrier that's unique to that laptop. And you'd have to take the hard drive out, put the solid state drive in that carrier, and put that in here. So what I'm going to do here is I'm not going to restart it yet because it'll just boot off the ISO image. So I'm going to go down here to Virtualbox. I'm going to tell it under storage, remove the disk from the virtual hard drive. Boom. So now I can see the controller is empty. Now, when I restart, it should start, he said, should start off of the image that we've installed as an operating system under Virtualbox. And
then for the hard install, just like with Windows and Linux, you know, the message will come that after it shuts down, to take out whatever medium you're using, whether it's the USB or a CD, DVD, take it out. So then therefore your computer will boot to your hard drive as normal.
Right. A lot of computers nowadays, if you hit some function key or escape, it'll ask you for boot order, and you can override the boot order. The boot order is defined in the BIOS or UEFI, but typically it's, I don't know if they default to CD first now anymore, but you can select the hard drive, even if there's a CD in the carrier, and boot off the hard drive. But yeah, you should remove the media in any case. It's taking a while to shut down. I noticed this the last time. I don't know what it's doing. I could be brutal and reboot it, but that's okay. See what I could do. Where is it? Oh, right control. I'll tell you what, you wouldn't normally want to do this. We'll see what happens. There we go.
And again, for most Linux, when you run it regular, the boot up process takes a minute, less, whatever you're used to. How long it takes Windows to start up, it's all less.
Yeah, the first boot on install will take longer because it's still sorting things out, but after that, much quicker.
What kind of specs would you recommend for running VirtualBox?
Well, Windows 10, fully patched, by the way. Latest version of VirtualBox. I would say 8 gigs of RAM. Most modern laptops come with that much, and a big enough hard drive where taking 50 gigs away is not a big deal. Okay, so we're running the native install now on as a VM, a virtual machine. You can, in fact, shut it down. And what is this here? Let's see, sleep, reboot, power off. Oh, different username. Cool. There, you can log in as a different user. So let me put in my password, and hopefully I typed it right.
I think one question too would be the amount of RAM you have, because you've got to remember that you have to have enough RAM that you can give part of your RAM to your host machine, your regular machine, the Windows, and then part of it to a regular. If you want to give 2 gigs of RAM to the virtual machine and you only have 3, Windows isn't going to run very well on the remaining 1 gig.
Right.
So, minimum of 4 so that you can have 2 to run. I'm just so used to Linux that I can run virtual machines and the host machine with 4 gigs or so. But that would probably be the least that I would try to do, because you'd have to give 1 or 2 to the virtual machine, and other than the remainder to your own machine.
So we're booted in here, and you'll notice the resolution is kind of low. So I'm going to do what I wanted to do, what I did earlier under System Settings. And by the way, folks, this is a 5-year-old laptop. It's not new by any means. So your mileage may vary, as they say. See, it's set for 800 by 600. I'm going to do, what did I say, 1024 by 12. What is this machine? I forget. Anyway, we'll bump this resolution up a bit. There we go. So, stop it. There. So, here's your, configure the desktop. This is the default wallpaper. It's pretty boring. We'll apply this one. We're done. That's standard stuff. Pop-up menus. This is the text editor I really like. Oh, the file manager in KDE Plasma, it's called Dolphin. I don't know why. It is really, really nice. Split views, copy and paste, run, unzip, everything you'd expect. I did notice something here. Let's see how many updates are available. Thinking about it. And by the way, historically you've had to be careful about downloading things, because who knows where they came from and what they've got in them, and some of them are disguised to look like regular programs. All of the updates that these machines get are based on, and let me back up a little bit. Back in the early days, didn't have package managers. You just had a package installer. And if it had dependencies, like I need these programs to install, you had to install those first. And it was very laborious. Well, they finally developed package updaters. It's Yum for Fedora, and it's apt for Debian and all of its children. But as it got more and more popular, the sites where you got the package from got overloaded. So what they did was they established mirror sites with all the same software, many places around the world, universities and whatever. And mirrors are quite secure, and the packages are signed, encrypted and signed. This worked very well, and when Apple came out with the iPhone, they needed something similar, and they adopted that same method of mirrors, but they called it the App Store. So good ideas get swiped. Let's see how many we have here. It doesn't give us a number, but there's 192 megs of updates. Packages tend to be fairly small in Linux. That means there's a lot of them here. I'm not going to, well, I can apply them here, I guess. We can let it run in the background. Let's see. Update all. And see, it's going to make sure that I am really the owner of this machine. And we'll go back up here to the top. You can see how it's downloading and installing these. We can go off and do other stuff. This is the favorites, just like your, what do you call it in Windows? Start menu. But over here are the applications. Oops. Yeah, here. You got your games, graphics, internet stuff, whatever they've decided to install. But the Discover program is the one that lets you search for applications like, say, editors or graphic editors or something. Pick one and download it very painlessly. Every Linux application that's worth its salt will be in every mirror site, so you don't have to go out in the wild, wild internet and look for it. There, let's see. I don't care about that. Let's see.
I think one point that we would like to get across to everybody is if they are running a live version like we're doing, that it has no effect on their original operating system. So if you're going to boot live to a USB or to a CD, DVD to actually, because it takes more, that you can be running this live version and it doesn't affect your computer at all. You're not doing any damage to it whatsoever. But my biggest thing that I really like about running a live CD, and we do this a lot at our repairs, is that a live Linux CD reads all the files on the host Windows computer. And we can use a live CD to recover files that maybe a hard drive is not working right, and we can pull those off for people and back it up. In fact, the scary part for Windows people is that using a Linux CD, you don't need to have any passwords to get into their file system because it accesses the hard drive.
Yeah, the files themselves would have to be encrypted in that case.
Yeah.
And by the way, there are Linux distributions that are intended as rescue CDs. They will boot in and they will have all the tools for recovering files, recovering file systems, making a Windows drive bootable again if it's been damaged. I don't have much experience on that because I don't run Windows much, but I do know those are out there.
I had a question that somebody saw up in the top corner that there was a button for reporting a bug.
That's right. The software developers encourage bug reports. Typically, you have to have an account on their bug reporting system up front, but it's username and password and that's it. And if you discover a legitimate bug and you tell it to go ahead and report it, it will gather all the system conditions at the time the bug occurred, not only in the OS, but in the application that crashed, and it will upload it. I have reported over the years, not a ton of bugs, a couple of dozen, and in quite a few cases, they've been legitimate. I've also made suggestions for changes, and a few of those have been accepted. So that's not something you'd normally do with Microsoft. But in a lot of cases, just an example, many, many years ago, I was running Family Tree Maker under Windows. And I was dual booting Linux at the time. And I was getting tired of Family Tree Maker's annual $19.95 upgrade fee, and wanted to get more towards Linux. And I was looking around for an application under Linux for genealogy. And at the time, everything I found was pretty lame, not very good. And then I ran across this application called Gramps. It was still in development phase. I was watching it, and when it got to version 0.1, I downloaded and installed it, and it worked. So I don't know if I told this story or not. I can't remember. Anyway, there is a common transfer file format in genealogy called GEDCOM or JEDCOM. The Mormons, Latter-day Saints developed it when they were doing their genealogy on mainframes. So anyway, any genealogy program worth its salt supports GEDCOM export and import. So I exported out of Family Tree Maker, booted into Linux, started Gramps, and imported this GEDCOM file. And it all worked fine except one field. It errored out on this one field anytime I tried to put something in there. Well, the main developer had his email address in the header of the program, so I dropped him a note, and he responded promptly. And after a few email back and forth, he says, "You mind sending me your import file?" I said, "No, here." And about a half a day later, he said, "Thanks, it's fixed. It'll be in the next release."
Mhm.
Made me feel pretty good.
Yeah. Do you want to talk a little bit about, since we can't show it, but you can talk about the process of setting up your computer and speaking specifically of dual booting? You know, you kind of alluded to part of it when with the virtual machine, but you know, kind of go ahead and let some of these people who want a dual boot know what their steps are.
Okay. Well, like I said, if you're going to install two operating systems, you have to make room on the hard disk for the second one. And in the Windows Device Manager, you'll go in and tell it, shrink my C drive by 50 gigabytes. And it will do that. It's well documented, takes just a few seconds. Then you boot on a bootable medium, USB or DVD, doesn't matter, that's your Linux. Tell it you want to install, and when it comes to the disk, you don't tell it don't take all of the hard drive, because that would wipe out the C partition. Tell it to install in this empty partition. And by the way, drive letters are not used in Linux. That's a DOS construct. They're just paths. Back when there were IDE drives that were called HDA, HDB, and when they switched over to SATA drives, they call them SDA and SDB. And under SDA, the first partition will be SDA1, SDA2. But it'll be pretty obvious when you're looking for it, what it is, and you tell it, yeah, install it here in this empty partition. Then you install, it's the same process we saw here, but rather than the bootloader installing inside a virtual machine, it will go out to the hard disk, suck up the Windows bootloader, combine it with a Linux bootloader, and write it back down into the master boot record. And then it will reboot, and you'll get that menu. Then anytime you boot up your machine, you're given the choice of Windows or Linux. Works pretty well. I don't use it too much because I have dedicated machines, but
Right. Well, and I think it's a little bit harder and harder. Windows has done some things that make it harder and harder to dual boot. And when Windows does an update, sometimes it can mess up that grub, and then you can't get back into either of them. So I think, you know, most of us are now recommending get that old laptop, you know, and throw Linux on there. And then when you decide you want to use it, then do your job. Okay, so now let's do the question is the opposite. I have a dual boot Windows and Linux. I don't want Linux anymore. Oh, that hurts. That hurts. How do you get it back to the regular way?
Wow, that's a great question. Part of it is to recover the disk space, and that would be just going in the device manager, deleting that Linux partition, and then growing the C partition to fill up all of the hard disk. As far as the boot record, that is there's got to be a way to reinstall a Windows bootloader, and I'm sure it's out there on the interwebs someplace. That's basically 2 steps. That's it.
Right, and there's a couple of disks out there that's, you know, Windows boot disk that will recover that and put it back. So yeah. With the partitioning, it's possible from a question, you can use the partitioning that's came with the Linux, or if you want to use your own partitioning program to partition, you know, your hard drive, that's fine. It doesn't matter to Linux what you use to make the partition, get it set up. But even using something like a Cronus to partition, it's still a lot quicker and easier if you're just shrinking to go into Windows 10 and just shrink that partition and then make it a usable space. I'd save a Cronus for doing some fancy multiple partitioning and stuff like that.
Right. It used to be, back in the days of big Unix machines, they had all sorts of partitions. You had a boot partition, sometimes one for var/var that was for data that was always changing. You had a bin file for the binary files. You had an sbin directory, and a lot of times these were all in different partitions. Made your partitioning a bit of a nightmare. But nowadays they just maybe make a boot partition and the rest goes to the root, and you put everything in there. You don't, servers are always running out of disk space, and they always have multiple disks, and that's where the logical volume manager is. You can combine disks to make a larger volume than the OS doesn't even know about it. You can grow it, move stuff around. We don't do that with desktops, so LVM, logical volume manager, isn't used, and the need for separate partitions is mostly gone away.
Yeah. I'm going to tell the person who asked this question that no, you can't do it, but I'm going to have you show them how easy. Go to Dolphin, go to your file manager. So
there.
If this was a Linux CD, a live Linux CD or thumb drive, or if this was a dual boot with Windows, over on the left-hand side in your listings, you would just see another listing that was your Windows drive. You know, just like in here, he sees, you know, his home, his documents, trash. You would see if he had a CD plugged in, you'd see the CD. Well, if there's a Windows drive, it would just be shown right there, and you click on it just like you would be clicking on my computer. Oh, you're going to do this. So it just shows up like your CD drive, and you open it up and you go through the file system, and there you find your files.
Okay, so this SMB drive, this is my home NAS. In other words, this is a Windows folder on a file server, and like looking at photos, there's all photo directories and, you know, I have no idea what this picture is. Brace yourselves. It's family oriented. You know, great kids and grandkids, birthdays and Christmases. The file, the picture viewer, my granddaughter. That was a long time ago. The file viewer that we're using is called GwenView, and it is really, really useful. Just within the file viewer, rotate right, left, mirror, flip, resize, crop, reduce red eye, which is handy. So I use that a lot. And by the way, if I wanted to say, for instance, take this and drag it over to, well, let's see, do we have a pictures? Now let's make, oh, we do have a pictures here. Let's go back to where we were. I'm going to split this. I'm going to, over here, home, pictures. I take this and drag it over here, move or copy. I'm going to copy it. Poof. Now I can take this one and edit, rotate, blah, blah, blah. So the combination of two I am in all the time. So, you know, I could, mirror it, rotate right, you know, whatever. I'm going to undo it. There you go. So anyway, it's been modified. Do I want to save it? No, I'm going to discard the changes. Right click, move to trash. Pretty Windows-like. So
now,
yeah,
this was even better because you're in a virtual machine.
yeah.
Right?
I wasn't sure it would work or not.
Yeah,
It's the first time
I
I've
was
ever
going
tried
to have him do it in his regular machine, but that's how easy it is. Windows or Linux recognizes the partition for Windows and lets you have access. Now, I have to tell you that in the past, I think it's getting better. If you were doing dual boot and you went to your Windows and the file manager, it would see Linux as an unusable section of files. It doesn't even know it exists there. But I think they're trying to work that better. But yeah, that's the one thing that makes Linux so good, is that it can rescue. You can get in and copy and paste config files that have gotten corrupt so that Windows will boot up again, because it just has that access on there. Finish up and then we can go open up into things. Do you want to talk about making a live CD, or do you want me to talk, or do you want to talk?
No, go ahead, because I do it in Linux and most of your users are Windows users, so you can better guide them than I can.
Okay, well, it's mainly everybody has a burning program, and all you are going to do is use the section of your burning program that says burn an image. And so you just go to your program, and you usually have a choice. Do you want to copy files, or one choice would be burn an image. And so you select that one, and it says, what do you want to burn? So you select that ISO and you say, burn it to my DVD, hit the button, and then poof, in a few minutes out comes a CD that then you can put in your thumb or in your computer. It doesn't matter with a laptop or desktop. Go through the boot change, boot to the CD, and you're running Windows. Running Linux on your computer without messing with your drive. I do that a lot because it's so easy to burn a CD and then throw it in and test out something. But it's basically just that two-step. Use your whatever your image program is, whether it's the one that comes with Windows or you have a preferred one. You go in and just select, I want to burn an image. I don't want to copy. Don't copy, because it still won't work. You have to burn the image, and then it becomes a bootable CD. And that program mentioning earlier about Rufus and NetBootin are the same kind of programs that are used to burn the image to a thumb drive so it can boot up. Oh yeah, questions about Firefox and DuckDuckGo. There is no issue because Firefox is a web browser and it's cross-platform, and DuckDuckGo is just a search service, and so I use it all the time. Firefox is pretty much for most of the Linux the default browser, and then you just add DuckDuckGo as your choice for searching. Okay, I think what we'll do, since this is the, we'll kind of open it up for the rest of the time to see wherever the other people have questions. I've been kind of monitoring and checking with a few questions about things for the next kind of sessions that we have, because for example, the Firefox and DuckDuckGo is a software question, but that was a quick one to answer. And I said, like next week or next time we'll do how do you choose with all of these different versions of Linux and desktops. So I think we'll ask Orv to stop sharing. He can collapse his virtual machine, and I'm going to ask Bill or Judy if there were any other questions that we want to hit before we go into our big extra session.
I do have a couple of questions, and as usual, a statement. You neglected to say, like you told me, I'm the head dummy here that doesn't know anything about this kind of stuff. I was feeding him these simple questions that I needed answers. That Acronis is actually a Linux program. Who knew? And a question from me is, if I have a 4 GB RAM old Windows laptop that will no longer upgrade. The radio button, that was the very first radio button, I believe that's the one you chose if you were going to blow your entire Windows 7 out of the computer and overlay it, or after it's gone, put in the your Linux system of your choice if you did this one. Or do you recall the top section, and then you said then, or you have to do a manual, or you have to do this or that. But it's my understanding that all I would need to do is, if I wanted to use the program you demoed, when I got to the screen with the choices on how you want to do this, choose the first radio button and Windows 7 would be gone and I would have a Linux computer. Am I correct?
That is correct, Judy.
Oh, that's how clear and complete your presentation is.
Well,
the other thing,
if you mess it up, you can always start over again. You don't have to relicense it.
And I do want to do that. If you guys have anybody in your group that does virtual desktops, it is a fun, outstanding, and for a lot of people, jaw-dropping presentations to have that person demo it. I had that at my club a few months ago, and we got to revisit the days of Windows 95 and Windows 7 and Linux. And then, of course, he had Win 10. And so we got to go into down the yellow brick road in our memories, but had a lot of fun going, oh my gosh, you can have all those going on at one time. I highly recommend that for a presentation.
Thanks for the thumbs up, Judy.
Oh, Dave Milton is the one who did that. All right, Dave. And it was an outstanding presentation. And
thank you very much.
All of the rest of my questions were answered. So over to John or Bill.
Okay.
John, I didn't have any questions from my group.
Okay, good. I've got another little bit of a impromptu extra. John, if you want to unmute yourself. John Mazur from the Pittsburgh area, a good friend of mine, has reminded me that for those of you who want to test out some Linux, he has, and I had forgotten about it, so I really thank him for reminding me, he has a suggestion and a place to go where you can bypass some of this work. You know, granted, what Orv did is to show you how to install when you decided what you want, and next meeting you'll get that information. But John has a site that he's going to share with us about how to go and try out some Linuxes without really doing anything. So John, go ahead and share with us.
Okay, John, thank you for letting me do this.
Oh, thank you.
I appreciate it. There is a website, some of you may know about it, some of you may not. It's called distrotest.net. And what it basically is, it's a virtual Linux server that is housing over, as you can see on the left there in red, it's housing over 1,362 different Linux distros. There are 317 that are unique, but then there are different versions of those unique distros that bump that number up to 1,362. Now, one of the things I wanted to tell you about is that on the site, and I'll kind of highlight it here if I can, but it's saying there are no restrictions for the operating system. You can use all the functions of the system. You can uninstall and install software, test installed programs, and even delete or format the hard system files. So with that being said, this is when you launch this site, which is distrotest.net, this is what you will see initially when it comes up. Now, if you know the distribution that you want to test, you can click on one of the letters of the alphabet, and it'll take you to all of the distros by that letter, okay? On the right-hand side, you've got all of your top systems. In this case, we've got Deepin, we've got Kali, we've got Ubuntu, we've got Elementary, we've got another version of Kali, a couple more versions of Ubuntu, we've got Manjaro, we even have an Android x86 system that you can try out. Going back up to the top, there's a home button, there's a system list, there's new systems. So if you click on new systems, these are systems that were recently added to the virtual server. And you can see here, it's showing you a thumbnail image. It's giving you the name of the file, name of the distro, the version, when it was published, any details. And then if you would like to launch this particular distribution, you just click start. Excuse me. One of my, I'm going to go back to the home screen here real quick. One of my favorite distros that I like to use, because it resembles Windows so much that I use it a lot. It's called Zorin OS. And if you click on Zorin, there are many different versions of Zorin listed, as you can see, starting with the latest, which is 15.3, all the way down to, I believe, 12.3. And there are light versions, there's a core version, there's education version, and so forth. In fact, I know you guys were mentioning how most of the Linux distros are free. Zorin has an ultimate version that is actually a paid version of Linux that I actually subscribe to. So, but if you come to this screen on with any of your distros, you can click on the image, and what it will do, it will open up a thumbnail. The thumbnail will open up to a full image of the desktop, and you can kind of see what the desktop looks like by clicking on that thumbnail. Now, if you go to details, this will give you the architecture, in this case 32 and 64-bit, whether it's EFI bootable, the usable RAM, whether or not it is compatible with VGA. It'll actually show the website, which is actually it's actually clickable. So you can actually click on this link right here. It'll take you right to Zorin OS website. It'll tell you when this was published, the amount of space needed on your DVD, and then there's some community data down here, which not every distro has that. But again, the thumbnail is here. If I want to start this system, I just click start. And what you'll see next is basically what happens, you have to reserve a spot. So right now there's a free slot is reserved for me, and the waiting time is about 1 minute. And it usually takes less than that unless somebody else is waiting as well. But what will happen is it'll automatically just start into the this distribution. They're housing all of the distributions on their server, and hopefully this will change over in a second. It depends on your computer speed and your connection speed and so forth. But this is actually getting ready to launch Zorin. There's no installing, there's nothing. It's running the live version of, actually not even a live version. It's basically an installed version of Zorin on this server. And it's going to take a few seconds for it to come up. But the one thing I will tell you is that when you're navigating with your mouse, the mouse is there's a little bit of lag to the mouse, but you can still go ahead and try out your machine. So now this would be what you would see if you were actually doing this on your computer at home if you wanted to do it, but there's an install button here. I'm not sure why they're listing a floppy disk, but and then the volume of this particular drive is 105 megabytes. But what's nice about the distro test website is it gives you a chance to try out different versions of Linux, and it gives you a chance to also see what kind of software that is installed on some of the different versions, because you may be looking for a certain certain software that you want to have installed on your Linux distro, and this would give you a chance to actually play around with the different distro systems that are on this server. But as you can see here, and as Orv mentioned before, very similar to Windows. You got System, you got Settings, you have Office, which I believe is LibreOffice. You have your internet, different internet programs here. You got the Thunderbird email, Firefox. I'm not sure what that particular program is there, but most of these have a browser built in. There's multimedia, different programs there. There's a program for burning software and ISO disks and so forth. So it's just an easier, like for me, a lot of our members in our group are just getting into the Linux thing, and this is a way for them to basically test this out with having to go through burning CDs or DVDs or setting up a USB drive so you can boot from that, or going in and doing the the virtual machines. So I find this very, very easy to use. If you want to get out of this distro, all you have to do is go back up to the top screen here and click on the X. It'll take you right back to the test screen, and then you can go back in and pick another distro from the list. Either go back to the home screen and pick one from, let's say we want to do the latest version of Ubuntu. We can click on Ubuntu, and I believe that's the latest version there, and you can go ahead and start the system. And again, it'll go through that same process. It'll tell you there's a slot reserved for you, the amount of waiting time, and then in a few seconds, the screen will change, and you'll start to see the distro boot up. So this is great, again, for people that aren't comfortable with doing what Orv mentioned, or burning DVDs or CDs, or creating a bootable USB drive. So, and again, it's all being housed on this server, so it's really cut and dry as far as being able to access the different systems. So
that's great. And like I said earlier, because of Sharon's schedule and couldn't do it, we probably would have done this session would be talking about the different distros, the different desktops, and then including this to say, now here's where you can go to test these out to find out which one you like. then we would have come back to today's workshop and say, okay, now here's how you install it, either side by side or fresh. So that is a great site. It'll save me a lot of CD burning and giving away, and for people to check. As he's finishing up this, a question came up with Gmail with Linux, and of course Gmail is web-based, so they don't care what you're running. I run Gmail on both a Windows computer, a Android phone, and a Linux computer too. As
Hey,
we
John,
open,
one of the things you just mentioned too is it'll save you a lot of time and effort, because in order to burn a DVD or set up a USB, it takes a lot of time if you want to try out a distribution. So this is just an easier way of trying it out. It's going to save me time and money, because I don't have to waste money on burning a disk or setting up a USB drive. So
yeah, especially when the disk can go outdated in a few months or so.
Exactly.
And obviously too, with using the disk and thumb drives, we would have to reboot the whole machine to try a different one out.
Yeah, and then it's coming up, and when it comes up to this, you saw this when Orv was talking, you would just click on try, and then it will walk you through a few steps. It'll ask you, I believe it may ask you for the keyboard and so forth, or maybe that's just on the install. But anyway, it's very easy to use. I will tell you this: you only for each distribution that you're trying, you only get 30 minutes to play with it, and then it kicks you off automatically. And then if you want to get back on, you can hit start again if you want to play with it some more. For some reason, it's taken its time here on the Ubuntu. No, there, finally it came up with the Ubuntu. So, but that's basically you being able to try the latest version of Ubuntu on this website. So
great. We'll make reference to that again next time.
Okay.
As we open up things, we found that the best way is if you go to your participants list and you have 3 dots in the bottom corner, there is a button to raise your hand, because with so many screens and stuff, it's sometimes hard to find people who are raising their hands on their video, and those people who don't have videos, we can't see you raise your hand. So if you go to your participant, click on it, there's 3 dots in the bottom corner, and if you have a question or a comment that you'd like to share with us, please click on that. We can call on you. I will mention that Paul reminded us all, if you are going to start doing any kind of dual booting or what, you want to make sure you back up your personal files, because even though dual booting shouldn't cause a problem, in the technology computer world, there's no guarantee. So it would be best that you protect yourself and then go along with all of that. So we will open things up if anybody has questions.
I can't digitally raise my hand because
Right.
I'm a co-host, but I have a statement to make about what John just showed us. He just showed us how to easily test drive your cars.
Mm-hmm.
essentially, Judy, yes. Yeah.
I thought that was cute.
That works great. I had forgotten about that because it's been kind of a while, probably because of the shutdown. I haven't been to any of our SIG meetings to share my CDs.
Well, it's nice. What's nice about that too is if people have, people in our group have a question about, hey, well, can you show us a demo on this distribution? Well, I just go to that website and do a demonstration of that distro.
Perfect.
And I can do it live, while we're on the Zoom meeting. So.
Yeah. One of the questions that came through, and I'll go ahead and answer it because it's kind of like the software question next week. Just like with Windows, say that word, Linux updates itself. It has updates for software updates. Depending on the distro, major updates or new versions come out at different times. There are some that are ongoing, like Windows, it's always updating, except Windows is pretty much a 6-month update. But we have some that they change from today, tomorrow, and you install it once and you never reinstall it because you always have the newest one. Some distros can be set up to update every 4 years. They might go 5 years, but 4 years. Ubuntu is one that comes out with a new subversion, a in-between version every 6 months. But between that, you get all your security updates. When software gets updated, you'll get a notice that there are updates to Firefox or whatever else that you're installing. So it updates just works like the regular. But the one thing nice is that with Linux, you can get some versions that will be long-term supported for up to 5 years without having to worry about reinstalling a newer version, that they'll keep it going for 5 years.
A question from Charles.
Yeah, go ahead, Charles, unmute yourself.
Well, actually, it's just a note about Ubuntu, which is the version of Linux that I've been using for 8 years. I sort of stick with what they call the LTS, long-term support, because the current long-term support, which was released in April of this year, it's nice because it keeps the kernels and all of those little bits and pieces up to date with security patches, which I think is terribly important for people to understand, that security patches are of the utmost importance. And a lot of distributions have these automatic update date systems that will let you know when there are security patches.
I don't know, Charles, if you were
long-term support.
LTS.
I think what I'm saying might be more applicable to next time around, because of the.
That's good. I don't know, Charles, if you did what I did when I first started in. I was a Ubuntu person, and every 6 months I would get with a group in Columbus, and we would have ourselves a distro party, and we would install an upgrade, and then 6 months later we'd do it again. And after a few years, I said this is getting tiresome with small changes, and so I usually stick with a more long-term. But that's everybody's choice.
Yeah, because it's just that I do the LTS for the exact same reason. It just infuriates me because they only support the interim. In the case of Ubuntu, I'm just using them as an example because that's what I know. They only support the interim versions for like 9 months or 9 to 12 months at the max.
Thank you for that. And that's another one of the things. With Linux is that you have many choices. You can go from something that is very long term to something that is, the minute something new comes out, you get it, whether it's good or bad. Sometimes the newest thing can crash systems. So I like to be a little bit more cautious and reserved.
I have a question.
Sure.
This one is for Orv. What version of Linux did you support at work?
When I worked at Simi Valley Hospital, it was SUSE Linux. And my most recent job, it was all Red Hat. I supported about 800 servers.
You were the person who updated everything all the time?
I was the man. We did, well, here's the deal. It's really hard to get downtime to upgrade servers. And so I had to negotiate with the customers and get proper downtime. So I spent a fair amount of my time after normal working hours running updates. And initially, they weren't doing it at all. When I got in there, I talked them into doing it. And gradually, they got used to it. And they were working at, then my company got bought by Abbott, and they were even worse. But they understood the benefits that were coming from not only security patches was what they would only initially install, but the remainder of the patches, which I called stability patches. So I think they were moving when I retired towards picking up all of them. And that's all I'm going to say about that.
Thank you.
One thing that I want to say before people drop off, I'll say it verbally today, and then in the follow-up stuff that we send out to those people who are registered with their Google, so we've changed that to Google form name so we can find you. For next meeting on the 2nd of December, I had to go look at the calendar, when we're focusing on how to choose, Sharon's going to be kind of leading that one to help you with, like you said, Distro Watch has 100 listed, and John showed that the distro test had like 1,300 listed. You know, how are you going to decide which one you want? And we all that are running it now pretty much have a reason we like what we have, and same as cars. I always refer to cars. We all drive the kind of car that we like. What I would like to have, since we do have some Linux users, is that for next week or next time, I'd like you to email me if you would like to help participate by sharing your desktop environment. You already know from Orv that he's a KDE person. And right now I'm an XFCE. We'll talk more about that next time. But I would like to have some people who would like to take part in just a short bit of here's what I like and here's why I like it, and show off a number of these. Like we would have a showroom for a car to come through and be able to demonstrate, because there are a dozen or so different desktop environments, and I'm not an expert on all of them, but I know Orv is really good on KDE because that's what he kind of uses. So if you're interested in maybe sharing your favorite desktop, I'll need to find out. We don't need 10 different KDEs, but with the dozen that we have out there, I think that'll be helpful to have somebody who's using to be able to say, here's what I like about this, which would be able to help people go in and check it out. So in the follow-up email, Judy will have my email address, which is just jkennedy@apcug.org. And you can say, I run this desktop, because it doesn't matter what distro you're running, because each distro has 4, 5, or 6 different options. And then you can say, I run this desktop, I'd be willing to share, and then I'll get with you beforehand and work it out so we can have a nice variety of presenters.
Outstanding. It's interesting that I understood the whole thing, which is way cool, because it's like a foreign language to me. So John and Orv, fantastic presentations. John Mazur, I thank you immensely for your input and what you talked about Zion and everything.
Can I make one more, may I make one more comment?
Yes, you may.
Absolutely.
So I just discovered, maybe some of you know this, there is actually a Linux distro that is skinned to look like Windows 10. It's called Windows FX. And if you're running that, you'd never even know you were running Linux underneath. It's just amazing what they're doing with. So Google Windows FX, the letter FX, and you know, give it a shot. It's not in that. It's not in the distrotest.net website. But if you Google that, and you'll be able to find it, and burn yourself a copy of that and run it, and you'll swear you're running Windows 10.
Yeah.
All the icons look like Microsoft icons, and you know, it's awesome. So.
I would advise you, if you want to do it quick, because all I can see is lawsuit, lawsuit, lawsuit.
Yeah, I've got several copies. So
yeah, Microsoft's just going to come down on them.
Yeah.
But it makes it easy so that somebody who is a Windows 10 person can comfortably move over. My feeling is, I wanted to leave Windows. I don't want one that looks like Windows. I want something else. Okay.
I mean, it's everyone's, you know, personal opinion, but if you're like, you really struggling to go from Windows to Linux, this is an awesome way to transition. So
perfect. All right, if nothing else, then you will get information about the next one. The next one will be talking about ease of transferring to Linux, because we'll talk about what software I recommend that you have to be able to smoothly go from Windows to Linux. Sharon will be dealing with how do you choose, and then we'll have a bunch of people telling us about desktops and what your options are. And then the following meeting, we will talk all about software, and that probably could take more than one with the amount of software that's available for Linux. Also, if you have your favorite Windows, what do we have as an alternative to a Windows software?
John Charles has raised his hand again.
Oh, okay, Charles.
A quick thing on what you were talking about. I seriously doubt that Microsoft is going to chew on anybody for doing that right now, because just because they have become a rather interesting partner in Linux, for example, and also another this is probably going to be relevant to next time around, because we're talking about choosing. So sometimes you run into situations like, I use the example of the Raspberry Pi. Raspberry Pi is an ARM processor, and Linux for ARM is still way in its infancy, and you're going to find you might find things like that when you try out various distros. You're going to find out the age of it, whether it works on, how long has it been around, those are the things that you have to be aware of. So I am interested in the desktop thing. So
Good.
Because I exclusively use GNOME, GNOME interface, because I use GTK for my programming. So that's another thing that tends to be messy.
Okay, great.
Okay,
All right,
John, let's cut it.
Yep, and I'll thank Orv for presenting today and sharing with us on installation. I hope that people can see that. And John, as our surprise co-host, I'd like to thank Bill and Judy for being co-hosts for us to run things in the background. All of you for joining us. I hope that you will be with us next time. It'll be a very fun one. And have a safe end of November. Have a great Thanksgiving. Spread it apart. And everybody keep safe, and see you next time.